We secure our doors at night to protect against the malevolence from the external world, yet it's frightening to ponder what might occur if wickedness is concealed beneath the guise of a trusted companion. This tale recounts an instance of exceptionally harsh treachery by someone near. Janie Kirk Hahn was born on October 25, 1983. Growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, she lived with her two brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Janie remained a cheerful child. She attended a small, renowned private prep school, celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Janie visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates and instantly fell in love with its beauty, aspiring to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives, joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. She later engaged in various political campaigns, including Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. Jamie emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During a campaign, she met Machen, forming a deep professional relationship. Post-campaign, their bond shifted from platonic to romantic. 4 months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Janie and Machen were thriving in their respective careers. Janie ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Machen was a well-known online strategist, aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows to heart, actively participating in a project for the Coalition to Protect Young Families in North Carolina. Although childless, Janie and Machen planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Janie was known among her friends and family as a compassionate, giving individual who had the ability to spread happiness. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, in an unexpected turn of events, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart. On April 22, 2013, around 5:20 p.m., Janie frantically ran from her house, sprinted a few dozen meters, and then collapsed, unconscious, in a neighbor's yard, her body drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street, shocked by the scene, shouted for someone to call 911. The neighbor who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jamie's disoriented words, he gleaned that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He hurriedly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on Jamie's abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled, bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Owing to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmured a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain the identity of the man, his reasons for being in the Hahn's residence, and the circumstances leading to the tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Broyhill, a close friend of Machen and a guest in the couple's home. John was also familiar with Jamie, who had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home, allowing him to stay until he was established enough to find his own place. Machen and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation, becoming virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Machen and Jamie's wedding in April 2009. The trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, living by the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan was virtually an extension of the Hahn family, given the extensive time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jamie and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Broyhill arrived earlier than usual with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jamie. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hans, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jamie, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon, so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend. They wished for even their yet-to-be-born child to have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Broyhill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hans invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jamie and John were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home. Heading upstairs to change, Nation was startled by Jamie's screams calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Broyhill, given his medical condition, had fallen ill, Nation hurried downstairs. Midway, he was met with Janie's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely, with John standing over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Broyhill turned and started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly, Nation was frozen in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed at the knife's blade with one hand, attempting to hold it at bay, while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jamie to run for safety, attempting to subdue a man who, until moments ago, was his closest friend. Despite her grave injuries, Jamie miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming the shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jamie desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house, but, overwhelmed by her injuries, she collapsed, unconscious, in their yard. Alerted by the commotion, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor, drawn by the screams, called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, in a state of panic, searched frantically for Jamie. Following the trail of blood, he discovered her in a neighbor's yard, conscious but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand, trying to reassure her with promises of recovery, future anniversaries, children, and vacations by the sea. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face. Clutching Jamie's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by the thought of a life without her, unable to fathom the sudden turn their peaceful life had taken. As Nation and Jamie awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jamie's bleeding abdomen. Tragically, the towel was soon drenched with blood. Another kind-hearted neighbor elevated Jamie's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to provide some comfort while the ambulance was en route. To the onlookers, the wait for medical assistance felt interminable, though it was only a matter of minutes. Jamie's breathing became labored, a sign of her critical condition, but upon their arrival, the paramedics promptly administered life-saving efforts. Nation, having sustained serious cuts to his hand while grappling with the knife, was also in dire need of medical attention. Both he and Janie were rushed to the hospital. During the transport, Jamie lost consciousness, and upon arrival, she was immediately taken for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with concern for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly attempted to access the ICU, desperate for any news about Jamie, but was denied entry. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was haunted by the knowledge of Jamie's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and severe liver damage. His only recourse in those agonizing moments was to hope and pray for her survival. By some miracle, Jamie did survive the surgery. But tragically, this glimmer of hope was fleeting. She never regained consciousness, and 2 days after their harrowing ordeal, Janie succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy conducted on Janie disclosed a harrowing reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were those inflicted on her abdomen and chest, which resulted in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Broyhill, who had inflicted wounds upon himself, was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, Broyhill, still in need of medical attention and with bandages on both wrists, was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. There, he was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case of Janie Hahn and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Hahn. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail and detained at the Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was chosen specifically because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Broyhill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Janie profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign managed by Jamie's team. Jonathan Broyhill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jamie with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jamie might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have been the trigger for his violent outburst. On the day of the incident, April 22, 2013, Jamie had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear, but it is widely believed that Jamie might have challenged John regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but the emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jamie's family and Nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near the Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church, a place where Jamie had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hahns had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Little did they know that soon it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss. Nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life and, even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jamie was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Broyhill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jenny's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000. The identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Broyhill claimed various health issues including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jamie refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Broyhill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then, the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following the episode at the Hahns' residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along, he had deceived Jamie and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, no cancer, merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful within. The search history revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehood. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but he canceled it on the 22nd, merely 2 hours before assaulting Jamie with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hahns escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, John grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Las Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jamie would confront him about the financial irregularities, and when she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jamie attempted to intervene, but at that point, he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jamie, but the chase of Nation was wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Broyhill himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nation Hahn was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Broyhill guilty of first-degree murder of Jamie Kirk Hahn and the attempted murder of Nation Hahn. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Jamie's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that the criminal later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hahns, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, the family's closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. With tears streaming down her face, Bobby flung herself into the embrace of her spouse, from whom she had been separated for 11 interminable years. The lady had fallen prey to a merciless lawbreaker. Little did she realize that in due course, she would find herself standing in the defendant's box. This peculiar tale, in which the testimonies of witnesses in the proceedings of Bobby Parker and Randolph Dial were split into two camps, continues to spark discussions about the location of the truth to this very day. Bobby Klein entered the world on May 13, 1962, in Oklahoma, born into a farming household. Her mother and father nurtured her with immense affection and attention. The young lady was raised alongside her three brothers, feeling utterly secure. Her upbringing in Kansas can genuinely be described as joyful. Having received a solid foundation, Bobby pursued higher education at Northwestern Oklahoma State University after completing high school. During her university years, she encountered the man who would become her husband. From their initial encounter, Randy Parker regarded the young woman as exceptional. Her demeanor, manner of speaking, and laughter. For him, it was an instantaneous infatuation. Bobby also found herself drawn to the young man. She viewed him as a decent person who would undoubtedly make a fantastic spouse. Randy somewhat counterbalanced her capricious and vivacious personality, bringing a measure of constancy to her existence. The two wed in 1982. By the time Bobby obtained her teaching certificate from the university, they had already welcomed their firstborn daughter, whom they christened Robbie. The daughter's name intertwined the monikers of Randy and Bobby, and the young parents were overjoyed. During her second pregnancy, Bobby secured her initial position as an educator. She was involved in instructing inmates at the James Crabtree Correctional Center in Helena, a state penitentiary for men where her husband Randy also held an administrative role. She derived satisfaction from her work and even garnered the accolade of Teacher of the Year. Randy was also highly esteemed by the Correctional Institution's administration and rapidly ascended the professional hierarchy. In 1992, Randy was elevated to the role of deputy warden at the Oklahoma State Reformatory in the city of Granite. The entire family relocated to a new place of residence. Bobby became a homemaker and concurrently a Sunday school instructor. Given Randy's respectable position, his family was provided with a residence situated on the prison grounds, just beyond its perimeter. That's where they settled with their two daughters, 10-year-old Robbie and 8-year-old Brandy. Life in this town cannot be described as thrilling, but the Parker family was content. To a certain degree, they found fulfillment in each other's presence. Randy was acclimating to his new role, while Bobby tended to the girls and the home. In the medium-security correctional facility where Randy was reassigned, life was also tranquil, with little of note transpiring. That is, until a new warden named Jack Cowley arrived at the institution. This individual was resolute in his intention to implement reforms within the correctional establishment. He possessed an abundance of energy. Ideas were veritably percolating in his mind. This distinguished him conspicuously from his subordinates who were accustomed to a serene and unhurried existence. It is at this juncture that another figure in the narrative emerges, an inmate by the name of Randolph Franklin Dial. Randolph entered the world in Tulsa, Oklahoma on September 26, 1944. His parents separated when he was a mere 3 years old, and subsequently, his elder brother took his own life. These occurrences left an indelible mark on the boy's psyche. He turned inward and discovered a vocation in the visual arts. Upon completing high school, Randolph matriculated at the University of Mexico, Faculty of Painting. Having acquired his education, he secured employment as an art instructor and earned a livelihood by selling his paintings and sculptures until he found himself incarcerated with a life sentence. In 1981, Dial perpetrated a crime. He sent 27-year-old martial arts instructor Kelly Dean Hogan to the afterlife. Despite the fact that this transpired in 1981, he was only apprehended and indicted in 1986. Perhaps Randolph could have evaded punishment entirely if he hadn't once, while inebriated, divulged the grave transgression himself. Dial maintained that he was executing an order for the mafia. They had allegedly recruited him as a contract killer. In general, this man possessed such a vivid imagination that he could regale people with a plethora of incredible tales. For instance, about his exploits in the Delta Squad during his service in Vietnam, and how he was employed by the FBI, the Secret Service, or the CIA. Randolph had at least 6 offspring, although he himself insisted that there were more than 9, and this was the product of more than 5 distinct marriages. Dial was an exceptionally intelligent, charming, charismatic individual, but simultaneously, he knew how to adeptly manipulate people and could effortlessly subjugate the will of another. While Randolph was confined in the Oklahoma State Reformatory in the city of Granite, he effortlessly established a rapport with the prison warden, Jack Cowley. By that time, the convict had already secured special privileges. He resided in a dormitory with minimal security conditions outside the prison walls. One day, he approached the head of the institution, Jack, with a proposition to establish an art program in their penitentiary. Dial elucidated that he wished to engage in something with his art and find an application for his own talent. The warden acquiesced. For him, it was a kind of mutually beneficial arrangement. Randolph could immerse himself in his art while he would promote his prison of talented inmates and demonstrate to everyone the positive developments transpiring at the correctional center. Simultaneously, they could raise funds for the rehabilitation of convicts. Dial exhibited exemplary behavior and established himself as a dependable prisoner. That is, he had the opportunity to depart from the prison dormitory with a minimal level of escort to participate in this art program. It was determined that the program would be launched in the Parker's family garage. Their residence, as previously mentioned, was situated on the prison grounds, just outside its walls, and Randolph Dial was granted unrestricted access to the garage and an excellent opportunity to work there on ceramic products, as well as impart his artistic knowledge to others. In the garage, Randy and Bobby initially installed a special kiln and then completely transformed it into a ceramic studio for the pottery program. The primary objective of the art program was to generate funds for the rehabilitation of prisoners. Soon, Randolph became a constant presence in the Parkers' residence, and Bobby volunteered to work in the pottery workshop, spending extensive periods alone with Dial without any oversight. Given the woman's abundance of leisure time, she proposed selling the crafts produced by Randolph, and he, in turn, pledged to instruct her in the art of pottery making. Despite the fact that Randolph was a criminal who had perpetrated a grave offense, he was granted a considerable degree of liberty. The prison warden even permitted him to venture into the city alongside Bobby to meet with prospective buyers. It remains unknown how Randy Parker regarded this situation. knowing that his wife was devoting a significant amount of time to an individual convicted of a serious crime, but he did not openly express his views on the matter. Meanwhile, the head of the correctional institution, Jack Cowley, introduced a new weekly radio show with commentary, where he proclaimed that a man named Bruce Reed would soon assume management of the art program. Apparently, Randy's discontent did surface after all. This signified that Randolph would be deprived of a life free from rules and regime restrictions. He would no longer be able to engage in his recent activities, departing from the prison grounds whenever he desired and pursuing his passion. He would have to return behind bars to the established living conditions. Scarcely anyone would be thrilled by such a prospect. On August 30th, 1994, Randy Parker, as usual, went to work at the correctional center. When he departed, he observed Randolph working in the studio in his garage as per usual. Later that evening, upon returning home, he discovered neither his wife Bobby nor Randolph at the residence. In the kitchen, the man found a note from his wife informing him that she had gone to the store for shopping, so there was nothing extraordinary about it. However, as darkness descended and his wife still hadn't returned, Randy grew concerned. Bobby's minivan, which she had presumably taken to go shopping, was also absent. The sudden disappearance of his wife and the absence of Randolph in the studio gave rise to vague apprehensions. Randy realized that he hadn't seen Randolph since morning. He requested an officer to check the room in the dormitory just in case, and when it was revealed that the prisoner was not there, the man became alarmed that Randolph had escaped, abducting his wife Bobby in the process. Randy had no other explanation for why these two were missing at such a late hour. Later that same evening, Bobby called her mother and asked her to convey a message to her two daughters. She informed them that she intended to see them soon. Over the subsequent few days, Bobby called her mother several more times, but she never once dialed her husband Randy's number. A few days later, law enforcement discovered Bobby's minivan abandoned in Wichita Falls, Texas. The officers searched the vehicle and found nothing there except for a pack of cigarettes of the same brand that Randolph Dial favored. The authorities placed Bobby Parker's name on the list of missing persons and those in peril. It was presumed that the woman had been abducted and was being held against her will by a dangerous criminal. At home, she left behind her husband and two young daughters. After that, no one saw or heard from either Bobby or Randolph for 11 years. Randy Parker never ceased searching for his wife, and one day his efforts were rewarded. On April 4th, 2005, law enforcement received a tip. A man from Texas had viewed a TV show called America's Most Wanted, which reported on crimes and the individuals who perpetrated them. The program covered long-standing cases, displaying photos of suspects on the air in the hope of obtaining information from the general public about their possible whereabouts. Once, the documentary series featured Randolph Dial, who had abducted the wife of the deputy warden of an Oklahoma correctional institution named Bobby Parker. A TV viewer called the police, believing he recognized the face of the kidnapper he had seen on the show. Detectives promptly went to this person to ascertain the details, and he, in turn, directed them to a mobile home on a rural poultry farm in Piney Woods, near the Louisiana border. According to the witness, the couple residing in the trailer behaved very suspiciously and had long raised questions among some neighbors. The man and woman scarcely communicated with anyone, living quite isolated and tranquil lives. If it weren't for the criminal's photograph shown on the show, this person would never have remembered them. The police surrounded the specified house. They were armed and, keeping their pistols at the ready, burst into this trailer standing far from other buildings. Inside, the law enforcement officers found a man, and nearby, behind the house, a woman who was mowing the grass to later add it to the chicken feed. The couple was called Richard and Samantha Deal, also known as Randolph Dial and Bobby Parker. Inside the mobile home, there was a loaded shotgun leaning against the wall by the door, and a pistol was lying on the table, but Randolph did not resist the police and calmly followed the law enforcement officers without any attempts to escape. It was later revealed that Bobby Parker and Randolph had been living under the pseudonyms Richard and Samantha Deal as husband and wife. After his arrest, Randolph gave interviews to numerous reporters who literally surrounded him and reported that in August 1994, using the knife, he had kidnapped the wife of the deputy warden. Threatening her with violence, he and she escaped from the ceramic studio located in the garage of the Parkers' house. Then he brainwashed her to such an extent that the woman stayed with him all these years. They posed as a married couple and constantly moved from place to place until they settled on this rural poultry farm in a mobile home. They had been living there since 2000. Randolph claimed that he threatened Bobby with violence against her children and family if she tried to run away from him. But in fact, he never did anything that could harm her. This theory, by the way, was supported by Randolph's ex-wife, Mary, while she was alive. The woman said that her husband had somehow rendered her incapable of reasoning sensibly and thinking independently. With deception and manipulation, he compelled her to help take the life of that karate instructor in 1981. After that, the woman felt so depressed and broken that after 4 months, she shot herself, unable to bear her own torment in the end. However, this whole story of kidnapping and escaping from prison did not end there. 3 years later, the entire situation turned upside down and divided the community into 2 camps. But for now, Bobby Parker was finally able to reunite with her husband and children. Of course, by that time, the girls had already grown up, since the woman had been absent for 11 long years, but they were no less happy about her return. The Parker family wanted privacy. They needed to make up for lost time over all these years, which had taken their toll on Bobby's mental state. She clearly had severe psychological trauma. Randy saw how difficult it was for her to get used to a normal life again. Her behavior had changed a lot. She began to ask him if she could use the bathroom, take a drink from the fridge, or eat something. She asked for permission for any action of hers, as if she was used to living under constant control. While the police were investigating Randolph's escape and Bobby's kidnapping, the criminal himself was put behind bars. During the search of the mobile home where the fugitives lived, detectives made several strange discoveries. They found contraceptives, sex toys, and numerous Valentine's Day cards that the kidnapper and victim wrote to each other. Neighbors of the fake married couple said that Bobby always looked unhappy and was constantly looking over her shoulder. At first, Randolph worked on the poultry farm himself, but his health began to deteriorate over time, so Bobby took his place. The woman worked in hot conditions, performing hard physical labor, while Dial sat in the mobile home and created works of art. He was still engaged in his creative work, and for him, it was more significant than physical labor in the field. Further, the detectives discovered that every few weeks, Bobby would go to town to buy groceries and supplies for Randolph, as well as to cash checks from her job. The strangest thing was that she did this alone, without any control from her kidnapper. Across the street from the local grocery store that Bobby often visited was the Shelby County Sheriff's Office. It turns out that the woman could have asked for help at the police station at any time, told them that she had been kidnapped, and even calmly handed over to the authorities the person who had done it, because there were no other hostages in the mobile home besides her, whose lives were worth fearing for. But for some reason, Bobby did not do this. Once, due to poor health, Randolph had a heart attack and was urgently taken to a local hospital. It turned out that Bobby had another chance to escape and return to her family. However, instead, she went to the medical center and stayed with Randolph. Moreover, Bobby wrote him a letter where she confessed her feelings. Subsequently, Bobby stated that Randolph had psychological power over her. This was also confirmed by another woman whom the kidnapper forced to accompany Bobby while carrying out his errands. She was Randolph's former school teacher. Together, the women devised an escape plan 3 times, but each time when it came to implementing it, they simply retreated because they were too frightened. The management style of the head of the correctional institution, Jack Cowley, was called into serious question due to his special disposition towards the prisoner Randolph. The head of the institution allowed him to have his own work schedule, not at all related to the prison regime. This is what allowed him to escape, abduct citizen Bobby, and keep her captive for several years. Some of the prison staff even joked about the boss and called the warden's philosophy, "hug a thug." In an interview shortly after his arrest, Randolph Dial presented his version of the events of August 30th, 1994. He said that he did not regret exchanging a life sentence at his age for 10 years of free life with a woman, even if after that he would have to face the full severity of the law. Oddly enough, the man stated that the relationship between him and Bobby was never romantic. They even slept in different rooms. Most likely what Bobby experienced can be called Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome, or traumatic bonding, is a condition in which hostages form an emotional dependence and attachment to their captors. Over time, victims begin to feel sympathy for the criminals, and often this happens out of fear of violence or pain. Randolph said that Bobby lived under the impression that if she ever tried to escape, he would find her and make her regret it, especially regarding her family. And although Dial did not mean that at all, he did not seek to dissuade the woman for fear of being left in complete solitude. Neighbors considered this union strange. They practically did not communicate and did not even talk to each other. The couple tried to avoid trips to the city as much as possible, and if some unfamiliar car drove into their yard, the owner of the mobile home would come out on the porch with a weapon and demand that they get away from his territory. The couple's house stood in a secluded place on a wooded lot opposite 5 large metal chicken coops. Neighbors said that Bobby was very sweet, while Randolph was very detached, cold in communication, and always treated everyone with suspicion. He did not like it when someone intruded into their personal life, let alone the trailer. On February 2nd, 2007, Randolph Dial was sentenced to an additional 7 years in prison for escaping from prison, but this was in addition to his life sentence. So for him, this sentence essentially changed nothing. In prison, his health continued to deteriorate. He suffered from a long list of diseases, including lung cancer and heart problems. And on June 13th, 2007, Randolph died at the age of 62 in a maximum security prison in Oklahoma. When Bobby Parker finally reunited with her family after an 11-year separation, she was incredibly happy. The woman tried not to remember the 11 years of continuous daily nightmare. It seemed that now the life of the Parkers should get better, but many people had doubts whether it was a kidnapping or something completely different. One of those doubters was the head of the correctional center, Jack Cowley. He stated that the relationship between Bobby and Randolph was not normal. That is, it could not be called a relationship between a civilian and a prisoner serving a sentence. Once he saw the two of them drinking coffee on the porch of the Parkers' house and chatting nicely, and this was not an isolated case. On the other hand, wasn't it he who decided to organize a ceramics studio outside the prison in a house where, in addition to a correctional officer, his wife and children lived? According to Cowley, after the police found Randolph and Bobby, it was easier to detain Randolph than to find out what role Bobby actually played in this whole situation, whether she was a hostage in reality, because when the arrested man was being taken away, she insisted that the police give the man his cigarettes and medicine. How to understand such a caring attitude towards your kidnapper if you were held against your will for 11 years? Wouldn't you spit on the personal needs of your kidnapper? The prosecutors had a different opinion on this matter. They believed that Bobby was a woman who fell in love with a prisoner. She ran away with him of her own free will. This is the picture that emerged when, during a search in the mobile home, only one bed was found. Although Randolph insisted that they slept in different rooms. In addition, joint photographs, love letters, special occasion cards, contraceptives, and intimate toys were found. In April 2008, almost 3 years after Bobby was found and rescued on the poultry farm, she was arrested. She was charged the day before the statute of limitations expired. At that time, the woman was 45 years old, and she was accused of helping Randolph escape from prison. By that time, Randolph himself had already died, leaving behind only a statement that Bobby was an involuntary participant in this whole event and was his hostage for a whole decade. The investigation continued, and the trial in her case began after another 3 years. Then, 2 months were spent selecting the jury. The difficulty was that the city was very small, with a population of just over 1,500 people, and most of the residents worked in the correctional institution, so the judge did not want any of the prison staff to be on the jury. The trial finally began in 2011. The prosecutors stated that Bobby Parker was in love with Randolph, helped him escape, and lived with him in this romantic adventure for 11 years. The prosecution also claimed that the woman had previously had inappropriate relationships and intimate contacts with inmates in the prisons where her husband worked. However, Bobby denied this, and her lawyers insisted that Randolph had drugged his victim with illicit substances and kidnapped her. Bobby repeatedly told investigators that on that day, she felt dazed and at some point lost control of the situation. She came to her senses when the criminal was already carrying her in his arms to the minivan in which they left that day. The convicted criminal tied her wrists and ankles with a belt so that she could not escape. But even here, something did not add up. One inmate was heading to the art program that day. He remembers how surprised he was when he saw Bobby and Randolph in the minivan, and in fact, Bobby was sitting behind the wheel. Another inmate stated that the two behaved inappropriately every time they worked together in the ceramics workshop. The prosecution also claimed that Bobby had many opportunities to leave Randolph, at least while they were in the mobile home near the poultry farm, but each time the woman somehow returned. Their entire temporary dwelling also looked more like not a kidnapper and a captive, but a married couple's home, and a loving couple at that, judging by the letters and cards. Bobby, however, argued that she and Randolph were never close, that he never physically attracted her, and the found intimate toy was actually just a humorous gift from a friend. According to the woman, she stayed with Randolph because she was afraid for her family because of his threats. Bobby insisted that she was subjected to emotional and physical abuse by her kidnapper, and was afraid not only to escape, but even to move a finger without his permission. The man intimidated her with his tales of his connections with the mafia, so Bobby was afraid that even if Randolph himself ended up behind bars, her family could suffer from his friends in the criminal world. There was a lot of evidence for and against. The owner of the poultry farm testified about how Randolph mercilessly beat Bobby, and she often had to intervene. Periodically, she would find Bobby in the chicken coops. It was the only place where Randolph did not like to go because of the specific smell, so his wife hid there and waited until he calmed down. The owner offered help many times, but Bobby refused, believing that Randolph might not like it. Other neighbors of the runaway couple said they did not understand Bobby's motivation to leave her family to run away with an inmate. She and Randy had a happy marriage. At least that's how it seemed from the outside. 2 little beautiful daughters and a cozy house. Would she really give it all up for a life on the run and give up her children for an inmate? Bobby's husband, Randy Parker, tried his best to hold on for 11 years. He became a single father when his wife disappeared, but the man never lost hope. Over the years, he did not think about getting married again and did not even go on a date with another woman once, fully focusing on raising his 2 daughters. After Bobby returned home, Randy made a statement that he was only concerned that his wife was alive. She did not want to remember what she had to endure during those 11 years of hell, and the man never insisted on it, believing that Bobby had suffered enough living in constant fear for her family. Randy never stopped believing that his wife would somehow find her way home. Whether Randy really believed what he was saying or wanted to convince himself that way is unknown. The lawyers used the fact that Randolph Dial enjoyed special privileges in prison. He could freely move around the correctional facility and come to the studio garage of the Parkers at any time. If he had wanted to escape, he could have done it at any moment. Bobby could not have contributed to this in any way. In addition, Randolph himself supported Bobby's innocence, stating that he took her away by force and she was not involved in anything. The prosecutors did not give up and insisted that the fugitives could have easily agreed that if they were ever caught, all the blame would fall on Randolph, since he had nothing to lose. An additional term would absolutely not change anything in his life. In the end, the charges that Bobby Parker faced could have led her to a 10-year prison sentence. On the day the jury was supposed to deliver the verdict, the courtroom was full. Friends and family supported Bobby. Throughout the entire trial, her husband tirelessly stayed by his wife's side, afraid of losing her again. The jury delivered their verdict, proposing only 1/10 of the maximum term possible under the charge. The maximum term was 10 years, and they wanted Bobby Parker to spend only 1 year in prison for aiding Randolph Dial's escape. In the end, the woman spent only 6 months behind bars before she was released early on April 6, 2012. After leaving prison, Bobby Parker successfully reunited with her husband, Randy. In this perplexing case, there are many different contradictory testimonies and statements from witnesses. The main question is whether Bobby Parker could have voluntarily left her girls to start a life together with a man without a future. At the time of the escape, Randolph Dial was 50 years old, and Bobby was 32 years old. There was an 18-year age gap between them. This question still torments those who knew the Parkers and considered them a good, close-knit family. If the woman was taken away under the threat of death, why did she not seize the opportunity to report this to the police when she went shopping without her kidnapper? To this day, some say that Bobby was a hostage, while others consider her an accomplice. But where exactly does the truth lie in the bizarre story of Bobby Parker and Randolph Dial? Is it possible that the couple in love deceived everyone? However, the main fact remains that Randy believes his wife and is ready to accept her after an 11-year absence. A prosperous businesswoman, weary of solitude and possessing a significant fortune, encountered a charismatic anesthesiologist who harbored dreams of finding his ideal partner. From their initial encounter, a tempest of passion enveloped them, yet not all were delighted by the joyous glimmer in the eyes of the smitten pair. Deborah Newell is the protagonist of our narrative, a stylish, successful, and quite affluent woman. Her millions were not a stroke of luck, but the result of her dedication and hard work. She spent years climbing the ranks in the interior design industry, ultimately founding her own design firm, Ambrosia. Deborah devoted 3 decades to this venture, deeply passionate about her profession. However, her personal life, particularly her romantic relationships, didn't mirror this success. Despite being married 4 times, each union ended in divorce. She was a devoted mother to her 4 children, but her romantic endeavors with men consistently fell short. Having secured her financial future, Deborah yearned for something more fundamental, the simple joy of familial happiness. Her life took a significant turn a few years earlier due to a family tragedy. Cindy, her older sister, was killed by her brother-in-law, Billy Vickers, in March 1984. Cindy and Deborah's mother testified against her own daughter and supported Billy during the trial. As a result, Vickers was given a very light sentence and only went to prison for a few years for this horrible murder. Billy and Cindy were parents to 2 children, and this tragedy deeply wounded them. Following this encounter, Deborah also experienced extreme anxiety and developed a panic attack fearing firearms. She lived alone for a long time, and several friends encouraged her to purchase a pistol, but she couldn't bear the actual presence of a weapon next to her. Deborah took excellent care of her appearance and surrounded herself with lovely things. She lavished a great deal of time and money on skincare, makeup, and hair. At this point in her life, she possessed a plethora of fashionable stuff, including Chanel gems, Cartier denim, and Gucci shoes. The only thing she lacked was a devoted partner. John Meehan, a central character in our story, was born on February 3, 1958, in California, where he grew up alongside his sisters Karen and Donna. His father, known for his deceitful and fraudulent nature, passed these qualities on to John. Early in life, John became involved in deceptive schemes and fraudulent activities for his livelihood. He also dealt in illegal substances, which he used himself, leading to multiple confrontations with law enforcement and his eventual banishment from California. In 1988, he completed his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree, and later joined the University of Dayton's law faculty. His friends labeled him Dirty John, due to his ability to effortlessly attract women. John was notably handsome, standing around 6 feet 3 inches tall, with hazel green eyes and thick dark hair, and his engaging smile was particularly appealing to women. Post his academic journey, John encountered Tanya Sells, a nurse anesthetist by profession. They tied the knot in November 1990 when she was 25 and he was 31. Their relationship was fundamentally based on falsehoods, and John kept Tanya isolated from his family, alleging their malevolence. Tanya supported her husband while attending medical school in Tennessee and helped him get his license as an anesthesiologist. The couple had 2 children, but over time their marriage began to fall apart. Tanya learned from John's mother and sisters that he had been deceiving her about his past. She also found his secret stash of pills that he had been stealing from patients in need, and to which he himself was addicted, which explained his temper. Tanya immediately reported it to the police. Following an investigation, John admitted to all charges. However, he chose to flee the state instead of turning himself into the authorities, taking refuge in a Michigan hotel. The police easily located him. John was discovered unconscious, encircled by vacant pill containers, leading them to summon an ambulance to transport him to a hospital. En route, he regained consciousness, seized a medication, and left from the ambulance. He was apprehended once more and subsequently received a 6-year prison sentence in Michigan for resisting arrest and illegal drug possession. Remarkably, John served only 17 months behind bars. He somehow managed to have his sentence reduced and was freed in 2004. It was during this time in his life that he encountered Deborah. John, at 55, and Deborah, at 59, decided to explore online dating, which is how their paths crossed. Deborah was quite taken with John's online profile. He described himself as a divorced doctor and Christian in search of love. Deborah, having experienced a series of disappointing dates, was pleasantly surprised when she met John. He showed genuine interest in her life, commended her accomplishments, and seemed different. Their initial date was in October 2014 at a restaurant named Houston's in Irvine, California. John's goal was to captivate Deborah, and he did so by sharing, albeit fabricated, tales of his past, including a stint with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. He talked about having 2 children and owning multiple properties. Deborah pictured a selfless doctor who had devoted himself to global service. John treated her like she was the most wonderful woman in the world, a queen, precisely what Deborah, yearning for companionship, longed to experience. He even expressed eagerness to meet her family. His charming words made Deborah's heart flutter, and overwhelmed by the attention and flattery, they found themselves at her penthouse after leaving the restaurant. However, John overstepped boundaries on this occasion. After a few kisses, he sought to escalate things, but Deborah, uncomfortable with the pressure, asked him to leave. The following morning, John sought to amend his error. He called Deborah, apologizing and explaining that he had consumed too much alcohol and couldn't contain his emotions. This admission once again raised John's standing in Deborah's perception, leading to the continuation of their dates. As their relationship progressed, Deborah and John spent increasing amounts of time together. On their 3rd date, John declared his love and proposed. Deborah was so delighted by their companionship that she overlooked several peculiarities. For instance, John consistently wore his well-worn, somewhat unclean medical scrubs. At a stylish charity event organized by Deborah, John arrived in his scrubs, claiming he had no time to change. Nonetheless, Deborah didn't mind and proudly introduced him as her doctor to friends, posing with him for photos. Their bond deepened, and they soon decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter, Jacqueline, who lived in the penthouse with her, was forthright and critical of her mother's partners. She disapproved of John's unkempt appearance, finding it odd that her mother, typically adorned in Gucci, was involved with someone in dirty robes. Jacqueline also noticed John's peculiar interest in the penthouse's art, statues, and paintings, as if he were evaluating their worth. John persuaded Deborah that they should live separately. Just 5 weeks after meeting, they rented a house for $6,500 a month on Balboa Island's waterfront in Newport. Deborah paid $80,000 upfront for several months' rent, while John avoided putting his name on the lease, citing tax complications. So smitten was Deborah that she covered all expenses herself, unbeknownst to her children. She couldn't fathom her children's disapproval of John as he pampered her like royalty, preparing morning coffee, doing grocery shopping, and striving to simplify her life. Deborah felt sure she had found her perfect match in John. She was hopeful that in time, her children would warm up to him, envisioning a future where they all formed a harmonious family. Eager to bridge this gap, Deborah planned for John to meet her younger daughter, Tara, who was known for her softer disposition compared to Jacqueline. Tara was residing in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, and upon hearing about John over the phone, she decided to meet him in person. Tara's visit coincided with Deborah and John's move into their new residence. From their first encounter, Tara felt uneasy about John. His lack of cordiality, coupled with his silent, solitary efforts in moving belongings, as he tried to project a tough exterior, didn't sit well with her. Despite her reservations, Tara was willing to give John the benefit of the doubt. Yet, she quickly began to observe concerning signs. John didn't own a vehicle, and, although he claimed to have properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, he never suggested relocating or even invited them to visit. Moreover, John appeared to spend most of his days at home, often engrossed in video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to snoop through her mother's boyfriend's belongings and found a nurse's certificate with his name, realizing he was not a doctor. When John found out about this, he became furious and threw a massive tantrum. He accused Tara of trying to deprive her mother of happiness, shouting that she wouldn't succeed in separating them, while Deborah just stood there listening. Eventually, there was a big argument, and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children were only after her wealth. They were waiting for her demise and thus didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother, Arlene, a very religious woman, arrived. John put on an entire religious act in front of her, but instead of approval, he received another scandal. The holiday ended in another fiasco. Subsequently, Deborah opted to seek guidance from a psychotherapist who recommended establishing limits with her offspring and pursuing a tranquil existence, a suggestion she embraced. She and John made Balboa Island their home, indulging in local eateries, strolling about, and relishing the picturesque views. At times, John exhibited youthful exuberance, capturing bare-chested selfies and sharing them with her, engaging in playful activities, which rejuvenated her spirit. Deborah was immensely joyful, yet she remained apprehensive about John's attire. His wardrobe was limited to aged medical scrubs, loose, frayed trousers, and worn-out shirts, whereas Deborah desired her partner to be fashionably attired and complement her way of life. John claimed his finer garments were pilfered during a stint in Iraq. Hence, Deborah escorted him on a shopping spree, acquiring a complete set of high-end designer outfits for him. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas. By this time, their acquaintance was just under 2 months old, yet they chose to marry. Deborah concealed this development from her children. On one occasion, an unknown woman managed to enter John and Deborah's residence. John seized this incident to persuade Deborah of the need for enhanced security measures. Subsequently, he set up multiple surveillance cameras within their home, which he operated via his smartphone. He extended this surveillance to his wife's office, aiming to monitor her activities. John's objective was to exert total control over their environment. Gradually, Deborah began to inquire about his family background and previous life. For each query, John had an immediate justification or excuse. Despite noticeable inconsistencies, Deborah chose to ignore them, convinced she had met her ideal partner, though her children remained skeptical. Jacqueline took the initiative to investigate John's activities. Since he didn't own a vehicle, he utilized Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline installed tracking devices on the car to monitor his whereabouts, but this surveillance didn't reveal anything significant. Then, she and Tara engaged a private investigator. The detective soon returned with findings. They uncovered that John had declared bankruptcy, possessed a nursing license but not one for practicing medicine, and had resided in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One address associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters shared these discoveries with their mother, Deborah asserted that even if these facts were accurate, her affection for him would remain unchanged. In late March, a letter intended for John was received by Deborah. The sender was a former prison inmate, but she couldn't read it as John quickly grabbed the letter from her. Initially, he accused her of mistrust with a burst of anger, then claimed it was from a pen pal whom he was supporting emotionally. Deborah felt uneasy about this explanation. The following day, with her husband away on work, she decided to sift through his belongings. This search unveiled startling truths about the man she had wed. She discovered that John was an ex-nurse anesthetist who had succumbed to an addiction to pain medication, leading to his arrest and the collapse of his professional life. Additionally, Deborah uncovered evidence of his history as a swindler. Court records revealed that John had previously cheated and stolen from numerous women he encountered online. The court files included a search warrant for his storage unit, where authorities found a .38 caliber Colt handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. It was at this moment Deborah recognized John's true identity: a perilous individual, an armed felon. He had various restraining orders issued against him by different women. Most alarmingly, she learned he had been released from prison on October 8th, only to meet her mere days later. Overwhelmed by the revelations, Deborah meticulously examined the documents, feeling a mix of shock and fear. She realized the potential danger John posed to her and her children. Choosing to act normal temporarily, Deborah waited for the right moment. When John left for the hospital due to back issues, she seized the opportunity. With her family's assistance, she moved out during his absence. During the packing process, they stumbled upon additional documents of John's. These were printouts of online comments from other women warning about him. They portrayed John as a persuasive and adept deceiver, cautioning others to not be swayed by his attractiveness and charm. Convinced of his instability, Deborah resolved to end their relationship and leave. Despite her decision, John persistently messaged her, pleading for her to visit him in the hospital. Overcome with guilt, Deborah relented. By June 2015, John successfully persuaded Deborah to reconcile. He offered numerous justifications for the oddities found among his possessions. He admitted to concealing his past, believing that a woman of her stature wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. He had feigned being a doctor to impress her, and now implored her assistance to rehabilitate and salvage his life. Still enamored, Deborah granted him another chance. They relocated to a new apartment in Irvine together. This decision deeply troubled her children, leading the couple to maintain a distance from them temporarily. March 2016 had arrived, and the couple had been married for a year and 3 months. Deborah had been helping John to recover from his addiction, but she was distressed by the fact that her entire family hated him, especially Jacqueline, and this hatred was mutual. It got to the point where her husband forbade Deborah from seeing her daughter. When John found out that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate lessons, he called the school and slandered the girl in front of the teachers. In addition to this, he wrote her threatening and indecent messages, saying that her mother didn't want anything to do with her, and that one day he would come and end Jacqueline. It seemed that John was recovering, but at the same time, he was becoming even more evil and cruel. In April 2016, Deborah reached her limit of patience and filed for divorce. She wanted to peacefully break off the relationship, so she started to gradually withdraw money from her bank account to keep it safe. However, in her hiding place, in one of the lower drawers, there was $30,000. When John discovered this money, he claimed that these funds also belonged to him. The man realized that the case was heading towards divorce and began to show aggression. Deborah understood that she needed to flee. She took some of her cosmetics and work things and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine. The woman felt safe there because the complex had many surveillance cameras. She tried to obtain a restraining order, but the Orange County judge rejected her request because there was no immediate threat. John lived in another state and did nothing. All she could do was break off the relationship and just try to move on. Following his separation, John relocated to one of Deborah's properties in Nevada. He persistently tried to contact her, but she consistently ignored his calls. Opting for a different approach, John took a drastic step on June 11, 2016. That day, Deborah drove her Jaguar to work. While she was at the office, her car was stolen from the parking lot. It was later discovered about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline. Despite the intent, the car had only sustained minor damage as it hadn't been set ablaze. The security footage from the area unmistakably identified John Meehan as the perpetrator of the theft. On the evening of August 20th, 2016, Tara returned home from her job and parked in the lot. As she exited her car, John emerged unexpectedly. He assaulted her with a knife, attempting to drag her back into the vehicle. Tara screamed for help. In the ensuing scuffle, when John covered her mouth, she bit him hard. A fierce struggle broke out on the spot. Tara, donning heavy boots, managed to kick her assailant and dislodge the knife from his grasp. Seizing a moment of resolve, she picked up the knife and began to repeatedly stab John. She inflicted 13 wounds, with the final strike piercing his eye. trembling with shock, Tara was fortunate to be seen by a neighbor who came to her aid with a towel for her injuries and called the police. John, however, was still alive. The paramedics found he had a pulse upon their arrival. In his car, authorities discovered duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport, indicating he might have planned to abduct Tara and flee the city with her as a hostage. John Meehan was taken to the hospital, but succumbed to his injuries 4 days later at the age of 57. His remains were cremated, and no memorial service was held, as he was universally despised by those who knew him. Deborah and her children were deeply traumatized by the whole situation. It took some time for the woman to return to normal life, but she still struggles with feelings of guilt for bringing a criminal into her family. Deborah has become very cautious now. She carries a stun gun and pepper spray to protect herself at all times. She declared that she would never again meet someone online.